There we go. Okay, so as you are entering, please consider adding which school or organization you are from alongside your Zoom name. And the schedule for tonight is we'll start by inviting Dr. Wayne to spend a few minutes giving us an update on some things happening in the district right now that you might be interested in knowing about, things he'd like to talk with us about. And then Tina and I are going to spend about 25 minutes in conversation with Dr. Wayne about some questions that were pre-submitted by some of you and some that the Second District PTA board wants to ask. And then we'll spend about 15 minutes taking questions from you here in the audience. We invite you to write questions in the chat as you have them throughout the night. And then I'll ask as many of them to Dr. Wayne as we have time for at that point. And depending on the size of the audience and the number of questions we have, I may invite you to unmute and ask your question live, but at least just type it in the chat and I may ask it in your place, depending on what the situation is at the moment. And after all of that, I will wrap it up and we'll say goodnight. A few other notes. There's a lot happening in our district right now and in our schools, and that often seems the case, of course. That can also make emotions run high. So we ask you to be respectful and courteous with each other in this meeting and also with Dr. Wayne. We also have a few other Second District PTA board members who are here who will be monitoring the chat and helping with any questions or links that people need during the meeting. And with that, we're really looking forward to this conversation. We're glad you're all here. So let's do our intro of Dr. Wayne. Please join me in welcoming our SFUSD superintendent, Dr. Matt Wayne. He has been our superintendent since 2022, serving you all here in the district. Many of you may know that Dr. Wayne was previously the superintendent in the Hayward Unified School District. He also served as assistant superintendent for educational services in Hayward. Prior to his tenure in Hayward, Dr. Wayne was an executive director of elementary schools here in SFUSD for 2 years. Dr. Wayne began as an English language arts teacher in 1997 in New York City. In addition to serving 5 years as a teacher in New York, Dr. Wayne served as an assistant principal and an elementary principal in West Contra Costa Unified in San Pablo, California. We're thrilled to have him here today for this town hall with our Second District PTA and all of our guests. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Wayne, to share what you'd like to, and then we will pivot to our conversation.
Sure. And I'd like to introduce two colleagues who are here also. We have Demetris Rice-Mitchell, if you want to wave Demetris. Demetris is the Associate Superintendent of Schools, so in charge of all of our schools, and has been with SFUSD how many years now, Demetris?
This is my 37th year with the district.
37th year as a teacher and principal and district office and done everything. And then I also want to introduce Dr. Carlene Aguilera Fort. He is our Associate Superintendent of Educational Services. And he's coming back to the district, but how long have you been in the when did you start in the district, Carlene?
I think 95.
In 1995. So we got some history in the room along with me. And then I got to just share, I've been sharing this in various forms just because it was so heartwarming. You mentioned I started teaching in 1997. And so this is what I looked like in 1997. And just last week on Thursday, less than a week ago, my secretary gave me a message that Jennifer Woodson was looking for me. And she tracked me down. And this is actually Jennifer Woodson here. She was a student of mine in New York. And she said so I called her up and she said she and some other students from this class were talking about middle school days and they just remembered me and had a great, memories of our time together. And what really struck me is she says she's 37 now, because this was like 25 years ago, and she has her own middle schooler. And she said, I just wanted to really appreciate what you did for me as a middle school teacher and like how you are, really engaged with us. And that doesn't always seem to be the norm. And it just, you meant a lot to us. So those are the stories as educators we need that fuel us for 25 years or more. But I did want to start off by I'm going to get 10 minutes. So I'll keep an eye on the clock. Sharing just a few big picture where we're going as a district. I do want to just share what we're about as a district, and then provide how that connects to what I know is on people's mind, where we're going with our budget. And then we'll get into specific details because I saw a lot of specific questions. And so Carlene and Demetrius are here to help answer some of those questions. But oh no, wait, this isn't the one I wanted. Hold on a second. Let me get the one I wanted to. Nope, not that one. Aha. Okay. So I wanted to start when we talk about the district, you hear a lot of numbers. You might hear a lot of numbers. The number of students we have, almost 49,000, the number of schools, how big our budget is, what our budget deficit is, what we are, the number of classroom vacancies we have. And I want to share with you, though, to me, what's the most important number? And that's 1,000. Because 1,000 is the number of hours our students spend in the classroom with us each year. And this is the time we have to really make a difference in their lives and your children's lives and make sure they're learning what they need to be successful when they graduate from San Francisco. And it's so important that we stay focused on this 1,000 hours because we really have an ambitious vision and goals for our students. What we want for our students as they graduate is independent thinkers who have attained academic and creative skills to lead productive lives and contribute to our community. And I particularly appreciate about this vision is this notion that, that they're being educated to then give back and to be leaders and a part of our community, whether they end up staying in San Francisco or beyond. And I just shared this today with some aspiring administrators. We have a group we meet with each year of people who want to be administrators. And last year we had an aspiring administrator who was a student in the Lincoln's teacher pathway program. So when she was a student at Lincoln, she was learning about becoming a teacher. She became a teacher. She then was in the aspiring administrators, and now she's an AP this year. And that's like that vision come to life. But we want that for all of our students, whatever career they choose. And so that we represent that vision in concrete ways by having goals for student outcomes. And we have a goal around 3rd grade literacy, 8th grade math, and college and career readiness. There's nothing special about these goals except for they've given us a focus that we haven't had for a while as a district. And then we also, as we go about reaching these goals, we want to make sure we're honoring our values. And for me, the most important value is being student-centered and keeping in mind when we make decisions, how that's impacting our student. You might notice all our values spell out SFUSD. And I think another value that's really critical is our commitment to social justice, recognizing that we have a system that leads to inequitable outcomes. And how do we make sure that all students, particularly those who've been underserved, like our Black students or our English learners or our special education students, like how are we doing right by them? And so we really have a definition of equity that says our job is to try to remove the predictability of success or failure that correlates with any social or cultural factor. And how we do that is really by focusing on what happens in the classroom, right? We're not politicians. We're not leading, community-based organizations. We don't have a foundation. We're educators. And I appreciate this quote from Lacey Robinson from Unbound Ed, a group we work with, that justice is found in the details of teaching and learning. So I want to give you a real concrete picture of what that looks like, because our mission is that each and every day, every student receives the quality instruction and equitable support they need to thrive in the 21st century. So what are we actually doing to make that happen? Well, we'll get into some of the questions around curriculum and instruction. We're focusing on, curriculum and instruction, on teaching to the standards and providing professional learning for students and defining what does good teaching look like, right? So you're all parents. You want your students in class where they're going to be challenged and they're going to be working to achieve at grade level or beyond. Our teachers want that too, but we are working on defining what that looks like as a district. So today was a great example of what that looks like in practice. We were at John Muir Elementary School where they do lesson study. It's a program that's being funded by the city that we're looking to expand throughout the district. And so today we got to see a 1st grade lesson in the auditorium. So if you can imagine, there's 100 adults, but the 1st graders came in and lesson study. What it does is teachers work together to plan a lesson. One teacher teaches it, And then the other teachers observe it, and then they debrief it and get feedback, give feedback to each other, as well as get feedback from an expert. Like we had, we have someone, actually a professor from Japan, and one as well from the United States who gave feedback. And so what the lesson today was helping students understand place value. And they got a problem where the question was, how did the students in a class were engaged in a jump roping contest to see who could jump rope, who could do the most jumps in a minute. And the question was that there were two, one student did it 84 times, another got 79 times. And how could you use place value to solve that question? And what I love seeing is the students did their work, but then the teacher made a smart move. She asked a student to share who said, oh, well, the student who did 79 jumps did it the most. Okay, well, obviously, we know that's not correct. But what she did, which was so critical, she asked the student to explain his thinking. And he went over to the hundreds chart that shows the hundreds and showed 9 is greater than 4. So that's why I know that this person jumped more. So what the student did, which was so smart, was use the number chart. What the student didn't understand, though, was the tens place mattered more than the ones place. And that's what the kids talked about. So I just share that to say, like, when we set these very broad goals, like we're working so that daily your kids are being challenged in that way. So if they get the wrong answer, they're thinking, though, the smart things they did are being highlighted, and kids are working with each other to help get to the right answer. So that's where we want to go. I'm looking at the time. I think I have a few more minutes. So now stepping back as a system, how do we make sure that's happening in every classroom? That kind of dialogue and among our students and that kind of teaching. Well, we're organizing our budget to support our outcomes by making sure we have the right inputs and that lead to the right outputs that lead to the outcomes. So the inputs are what we're investing. The outputs are the change that happens at the inputs, like the change among our teachers, that lead to the outcomes, the actual change we want to see around our student outcomes. And what we're really, as we go through this next budget planning, what we're really trying to define is what sort of district do we need that's effective in servicing student outcomes. And these are 5 areas we've highlighted that we feel like we need to make sure we have in place. You heard me talk about quality instruction, but we also need student supports, effective programs, well-supported staff, and an enrollment process that works for our parents, where families know that their kid's going to get to school where they're going to get what they need. And so we have a few then strategies to help us meet our goal. And none of those strategies, though, work if we don't have the staff. And the reality is we are facing a staffing shortage that many of you may have seen in your schools, either vacant classrooms or custodians, that were not enough custodians or not enough noon monitors. And so you may have seen, we recently invested in significant salary increases for our teachers, for our paraeducators, for our custodians, for our employees. And we did that because all of what I talked about can't happen if we don't have staff in school. And it's hard to stay focused on instruction when you're dealing with all these challenges. And so now what we need to do is we gave that salary increase as we go through this next budget planning season, which starts in January. We need to show how we can afford this and stay committed to what matters most, which is what's happening in the classroom. So next week, we're going to bring forward what is called the AB 1200 plan. That's what you need to do to show how you're affording the salary increases. But really, over the next 3 months, we're going to re-envision how we staff and budget our schools and focus our expenditures on what we believe will have the greatest amount of impact, like the kind of lesson study professional development that I just described earlier. So I think that's 10 minutes. That's a lot of information. But again, just wanted to try to give big picture what we're trying to do educationally, is also how we're dealing with our fiscal reality to make that education promise, make what we want to do educationally a promise we can fulfill for our students. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Michelle and Tina.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wayne. I really appreciate that for that good high-level summary. And unsurprisingly, you touched on a lot of the themes that people are interested in and we'll be talking about for the rest of the hour that we're all together. And so I wonder if maybe what we could do is just give you a little bit more time and maybe, you know, that slide that you showed that had those three focus areas, the math and the literacy and the career and college readiness, and you had some listing like the timeline to accomplish specific goals there. I wonder if you might show that slide again, because it kind of was a 10-second flip over, you know, if people can see that again. And I want to give you maybe a couple of minutes to give some more examples. That example about Muir today was great. And could you pick one or two of those areas to give another example of some kind of key initiatives on how we're going to get there? Right? Like you talked about the staff, you talked about the resources, you gave that specific example about Muir, but how else are we going to, what other processes and initiatives will be in place to help us achieve these goals on this slide?
Yeah, and I'm actually this is why I invited Dr. Aguilera Fort. Carlene, can you talk about third grade literacy and what's happening with our pilot programs and our focus on foundational skills and district aligned PDs? And maybe take like 3 to 4 minutes to talk about that.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Again, Carlin Aguilera Fort, Associate Superintendent of Educational Services. So with third grade literacy, right now, there are 3 key elements of work that are taking place. Let's start with every teacher across the district, this is professional development, professional learning, is receiving the same kind of professional development so they can learn and practice the key strategies to provide students with foundational skills in literacy. And then as the teachers receive that, the teachers will go to the classrooms and implement those strategies across the board. We realized that we needed that work that wasn't taking place, and that now is happening across the board in every single elementary school. That professional development is designed centrally, is provided to the coaches, is provided to the principals, and then from those 2 key elements goes to the schools. And at the school level, the instructional leadership teams of the schools and the teachers receive the same exact professional development that include content, includes strategies, include evaluation of those pieces of learning. That's professional learning. That's professional development. The second one, and I think you all know about this one because it was approved last year, is the piloting of what will be the adopted instructional material for language arts. For several years, San Francisco Unified School District has been operating without a specific set of instructional materials or what we call curriculum. And now several schools across the districts are piloting those instructional materials. By the end of March, the board will receive a proposal for the one set of instructional materials that will be recommended for approval. That then will go to the sites. And our goal is that before the end of the school year, every single teacher across our schools from grades K through 5th will have the set of instructional materials that will support them so that next school year will all have the same approach to literacy, including reading comprehension, including foundational skills. So those 2 key pieces of work are taking place, and we are monitoring every single aspect of these through evaluation of the professional development and also through evaluation of the skills and the content that students are learning in every single classroom. So that is in regards to third grade literacy.
And if I can just be an education nerd, can I share one more thing? I don't know.
Sure.
We'll see. I don't know if this works for a parent audience. You'll tell me. But Carlene did an excellent job of explaining what we're doing. And then, so, if you're probably engaged parents. So, we're talking about kids need foundational skills. That's like the science of reading in elementary schools. So we just did are going to be, this is it hasn't been published yet, but like we're going to share our progress monitoring. So before the pilot, we observed classrooms, and we saw in classrooms only 8% of lessons had foundational skills in them. But we've now been observing the pilot classrooms, and we see 75% of the lessons had foundational skills in them. So that's just, for me, like I said, it's really exciting to have some of that data to see like, oh, we put a curriculum in teachers' hands, we provided some training, they're using it. Now we got to see, does it translate to improved outcomes? But at least there's some consistency where, and what Carlene is speaking to is like, the district overall has been very decentralized, and that has its benefits. But for something like literacy, there should be some core practices that happen, whether you go to school, you know, at Guadalupe Elementary or Glen Park or Carver or Lafayette. And that's what we're trying to get to. So I just wanted to share that because that progress gets me excited.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. That's fantastic. I have to say that as a parent for a very, very long time in this district, that those are the kinds of data points that we don't get to see very often at the district level. It's really nice to see that the pre and post with a pilot like that, and that's encouraging. So thank you for sharing that. And then I'll pass it to Tina, who I think has a question about the budget.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of sharing things, I think one of the important things that's coming up is your December 12th Board of Education meeting. And I know that everyone's working on the budget to share, and hopefully it'll be on the agenda and discussed at that meeting. But is there plans to share, kind of like piggybacking on what Michelle's saying, as a parent, for families, staff, and other community members, is there a plan to share the budget draft or other information about details in the budget, kind of just like how you outlined in your slide deck about the progress of key initiatives for students? Do you have any plans to discuss that with the community either before or after the Board of Education meeting or in the near future?
Yes. And actually, I have a slide here I could share. I want to give, so what we're presenting in December is what's called the first interim report. This shows how we're doing with our budget for this year and the next 2 years. And then we're about to enter into the budget planning season. So first, I just want to emphasize again, we're prioritizing, meeting our commitments, maintaining fiscal solvency while meeting our commitments. I don't know if this is all going to make sense. So your first public audience here, so we'll see. But just so it's clear, is for this year, we gave salary increases. The way we're going to be able to pay for them for this year is two ways. One is we have what's called restricted funds that we haven't used yet. And we can move expenses to those restricted funds to pay for them. So like you've heard of PEEF, the public, like we have funds that we didn't spend over the past several years that we can use to help pay for that. The other thing we're doing is we have a budget practice we need to change is we have a huge amount of vacancies on our budget. We have 1,113 vacancies in our budget. And it's a combination of not being able to hire and positions have just stayed in the budget without eliminating them. That represents $120 million of our general fund. So we're eliminating vacancies and we'll see immediate savings from that. But here's the reality. Moving beyond this year, we need to basically, identify $150 million in budget balancing solutions over the next 2 years. We've identified some for next year to about $100 million, and then we'll have another $50 million. And what we're focused on right now is when I've talked about resource alignment, there's 5 areas: central office staffing and support, school site staffing, the programs we offer, our use of our property and facilities, and then looking at our school portfolio. So right now we're looking at the first 4. And what you heard me talking about is like the staffing we have at the district and budget office. I know there's a lot of talk about, are we talking about closing schools? And when we talked about resource alignment, we said, we're going to look at those first 4 areas before looking at the 5th area. But I want to be real that like when we're talking about staffing our schools, we want to provide the kind of support that's needed to meet our goals. We are going to at some point need to ask that question, how much staff do we want to have and how many number of schools do we want to have? But right now we're focused on the central office, school site staffing programs, and real estate. And so what you will see for next year as an example is we don't do, our staffing right now has not been, it's very, for the non-technical term, it's all over the place, right? We haven't been very good. So we will have classrooms that are very small classrooms for a variety of reasons. You know, as a parent, that might be great if we literally have classrooms with 6 kids in them, but that's not a sustainable system. As an educator, I could tell you that if there's 22 kids in an elementary class and a qualified teacher, which is an issue, your kids will get a great educational experience. So what you'll start to see next year is a lot fewer of those really small classes and having classes that are more at the level what we call is what the contract allows for, right? Of 22-1, 30 in the upper grades and in high school. So hopefully that gives a picture of where we need to go. And I think we can get there. We just need to talk about how are we using those funds to support what we believe is important.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. That's great. That feeds into the question that actually Michelle is going to ask next.
Yeah, so continuing with that topic about staffing, you've talked about it already a lot tonight. We've seen comments here in the chat, and we have some just general questions about the staffing challenges that our district is facing. So there are still classrooms that don't have teachers today. There's teacher shortage in high schools. So as you talk about this and talk about resource alignment, how will we find teachers to fill the spots that are open? So it's great if we have resource alignment, but are there some strategies that you all are thinking about and planning to use to recruit teachers, to retain teachers? And then I'll add kind of a third element to that. I will add that anecdotally, I have heard of folks who've had challenges with just the length of the process that it takes to get hired, where they may apply and then it takes a long time to actually get through the system and then make it, to being a teacher. Even if we have a willing candidate, it's hard for them to actually get into a classroom by the time they get through the process. So could you perhaps talk about those elements of our staffing challenges?
So first and foremost, we're hoping the salary increase as well as some other changes to the contract to improve working conditions shows our commitment to attracting and retaining teachers. And we think that will be a real help. And not just teachers, we have a paraeducator shortage, and appreciate our teachers union, which includes paraeducators, really fought to increase the salaries there. And we agreed that needed to be a priority. So any paraeducator in this district will make $30 an hour at least, which is really a good starting point. So that's one piece. The second piece is we need to start hiring earlier. And part of this process of re-envisioning how we staff is being clear up front where the staffing needs are and starting hiring earlier. And then if we have to, through this budget alignment process, if we're going to have, say fewer classroom teachers, that will be helpful because every year we're hiring like 500 teachers, and that's really hard to find. But regardless, we need to know this sooner. And then thirdly, frankly, I see some comments in the chat. We do need to streamline our hiring process, but particularly on the, basically when anything is slightly different. What am I trying to say? Like on those unique situations, which unfortunately aren't that unique. So what happened this year is, by August, when we're trying to bring on board people, who may not have a standard credential. When you have a standard credential, like the onboarding process, there might be some frustrations, but generally goes okay. But what happened this year, and where parents maybe at Aptos have been really frustrated, or at Willie Brown Middle School or at Lincoln High School, they're like, we know you have a candidate. Okay, but that candidate might not have a full teaching credential. And, so then the steps that we take to get them in the classroom sometimes have taken too long or have not at least been transparent. Here's why, you don't, as parents, you don't want us to just put anybody in the classroom. They need to have some of the right background. And that's what's been taking a while. So streamlining our processes, hiring earlier, and, providing a salary increase are our key strategies for next year. We can't start off like how we did this year.
Okay, thank you for that. We may have some follow-up questions when we get to the audience Q&A a little bit, that you see like there's many popping into the chat right now. So we'll try to cover some of those in a little bit, but I'll pass it over to Tina to go to a next area, and then we'll catch some of those later.
Yes, I know we've been talking a lot about the students, the teacher shortages and addressing that, but I also want to talk a little bit about the students. You had this big movement in September for Student Absence Awareness Month. And so we wanted to hear a little bit about how your SFUSD overall strategy for student absences is going, and any successes you want to share with us from so far this school year. And also to piggyback on that, maybe share a little bit about what chronic absences are and how you hope to help that go down. And we also understand the absenteeism can differ from school to school and for different populations of students, such as disabled or SPED students.
Yeah. And the pandemic, we have not yet recovered from coming back from the pandemic to have attendance overall as we want. And we see much greater chronic absenteeism, which means if a student is absent for more than 10% of the year, they're considered chronically absent. And so Demetrius Rice-Mitchell, who's in charge of our schools, has done an incredible job. Again, you're going to hear this theme of like working system-wide to get some system-wide attendance plans. So I'm going to have Demetrius share about that.
Good afternoon, and it's all good afternoon. It is clearly evening. Good evening. Thinking about what my colleague shared earlier, first and foremost, what Dr. Aguilar-Fort, if we're going to reach these academic goals, absolutely, we have to make sure that the students are in the seat. And so one of the big things that we're hearing on what we're really working on is alignment and coherence. And so really taking a step back, one of our guardrails, guardrail 2, is to reduce chronic absenteeism. And so we took a step back so that we would have aligned practices throughout the system, from our pre-K classrooms to our high schools as well. So one of the things we thought about, what's a system where attendance can be a topic? And so a system that we all had, it's called the Coordinated Care Team. And so it's a place where you can look, it's a myriad of things that you look at students' experience. But one of the things that we wanted to happen in that care team was to have a discussion around attendance. Not only a discussion, but to have hard data. Who are the students that are not coming to school? And then we really are tying it to a sense of belonging as well. And so what we talked about in the beginning, just as you all as adults, people don't come to places where they don't feel seen, loved, or wanted. And so really asking the schools to do some reflection, not on the families and the students, but what type of environment are you providing where families want to be there? And so at the Coordinated Care Team, we asked each school to create a team and a plan. And we're most excited because every school, we gave a deadline, and every school in the district gave us their plan. And so, but we were okay with it. There were like 3 different levers for it. And so there wasn't a right or wrong, just where are you right now? And so the intent is that the executive directors and the assistant SUPs are working with the principals in the schools to develop those plans. And more than most ever, what we're really looking for is that you have some data conversations. You're trying to connect who has the best relationship with those families. What type of incentives are you offering? What type of celebrations are you offering? Not only for attendance, but overall climate. So we're doing both things in tandem. What type of environment are you providing so that families want to come and kids are excited from pre-K to high school? And then what type of specific, how are you teasing out those families who are not and getting those ideas from them? We have 4 middle schools and 4 high schools that we're going through this. We're going through this attendance pilot, and we're collecting street data. So we're asking specifically the students, hearing from them, what is it that keeps you from coming to school, and talking to their families as well, and really trying to adjust our strategies to meet the needs. It's particularly in middle school and high schools, we can collect a lot of data from them as well. And so we're excited. Weekly, we have attendance data that we receive. And so schools are looking at it, and then they're checking. It's called missing section reports. And you can see clearly who didn't take attendance, who did take attendance. And the CCT plans were that basic. When is attendance going to be taken? Who's going to input it? What type of incentives are you offering? So we asked every school to list it out something that we had not done across the district. So we're excited about what's going on, because we know this ultimately is going to lead to the outcomes that Dr. Fort was mentioning earlier in our conversation.
That's wonderful to hear. I'd love to see some of that data if you were planning to share it later down the line. But is there anything that PTA or PTSA units can do to support their schools to help with absenteeism issues?
I saw that question. I would absolutely ask your school, like, what are you doing? I heard about this wonderful idea. Is it something that we can, is it some way that we can support with doing the incentives? Are you doing some type of campaign? Is it something that we can create around the school to bring awareness with it as well? And so I would definitely ask each one of your schools, heard about your CCT plan, is there a way that we can be involved with it as well? Are you going to have any type of big days that you celebrate? Can we support in that as well?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate your input. I'm going to give it back to Michelle for our final question.
Great. Thank you. So before there's a couple of smaller questions that I'm going to ask kind of in this category, which is more around family and student engagement and some kind of survey follow-up and things. Just want to encourage folks who are here, if you have questions, to put them in the chat. I would say there are a lot of comments and anecdotes around the staffing thing that you've probably seen. They're not so much questions as just plus oneing to some of the things that we heard. So you can take a look at those. So people put things in the chat. So with the recent staffing and calendar surveys, have you been receiving good responses to those? And when you get responses to surveys like that, do you all have plans or intentions to share some of the data that you're collecting with the community?
Yeah, so one of the when the board adopted you saw the vision and the values and the goals, we also adopted guardrails. That's how we operationalize the values. And one of the guardrails was, when making major decisions, to get input from those who are impacted by the decisions. And we had heard a lot, we had heard a lot of frustration from families about the calendar, particularly how late it came out. And then we've been trying to figure out, if we'd add any extra days off or how that would work. And so we do have a calendar committee, and this is something that's negotiated. So we've worked with labor as well as then kind of like a lead committee. And yeah, so we've gotten over 1,000 responses so far, which sounds pretty good, but it's also, we got 49,000 kids, so we'd like more. But it is a meaningful enough number where we can look at some of the data. And then when we make our recommendation, we'll share how the feedback we got informed it. And so we are planning, we're on target. There's still a couple things that could make it happen, but we're actually planning to present in January 9th, our calendar for the next 2 years. We decided to have a 2-year calendaring process, and then each year work on the year out. So even if the reason why I say, we're on track, but again, labor, there's some negotiations around it. I'm not blaming labor. They just got to work through their things too. But we'll get something out, well before March or April. I think it's been even May, I've heard that we've gotten it out. That, and it makes it hard for families to plan. It's frustrating for everybody. So yes, we do take that feedback in. It's looked at with the committees and the leaders of these projects. And yes, we will be getting a calendar out sooner.
That's great. Thank you for that. I know there will be a lot of people very excited to hear about those, the earliness of that coming out.
But you could help with another blast of the survey. It's still out there. And so, if you need a link, Tina can email me.
We could put that out. Yeah, we could put that out in an upcoming newsletter. One thing I will just to encourage that sharing. One of the things that SFUSD historically, before you were in this role, I think sometimes misses opportunities to share how community input informed a decision, to show that when there is listening, that it happened and that it actually influenced a decision. So I think it's really great to take advantage of those opportunities.
Let me say something I've learned, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Not only maybe have we not done that, we've also haven't been clear when it hasn't informed a decision. Something I've met numerous times with our African American Parent Advisory Committee, and I remember in the first meeting we shared, they shared. Actually, the first meeting they came to the board, they shared, we don't have new recommendations. We have the same ones because we can't tell what you did with our previous recommendations. And, and I feel like you all, community members, parents are giving your time. I don't think you're sharing with the expectation, like we act on every recommendation. You're saying like, we'd like to know, what are you going to do and what aren't you going to do? And so I'm trying to build in a practice of when we get feedback and recommendations, like from our advisory councils, that we respond. And if we can't do something, let's just say it. Like, we're not going to work on this right now, but here's what we are working on. So I definitely, I think this is an area where there's a lot of room for growth.
That's great. And and to just build on that, I think that also builds a lot of trust with your community when you're very clear about what is taken, what is not, why, things like that. So that's good to hear. As we have questions continuing coming in, I have one that I'm going to ask around the budget. I wanted before that, it's not a question that we shared with you ahead of time, but I'm confident you'll be able to share a little bit about this. And that is how school site councils and individual school sites are connected to our LCAP process, which is our local control accountability plan for folks who are sitting in this meeting. Because I know that we're looking at something new in the district this year and how they are connected to that process, how we have a different committee that's forming and engaging with that plan that shows how San Francisco Unified is using its resources to advance goals and support students. And so could you talk a little bit about how that's going to work this year and so that people are aware of that?
Yeah, and thanks for explaining what our acronyms are, because we love our acronyms. And so the LCAP requires parents and community input. In the past, we've had kind of centrally driven processes to get that through like a centrally appointed parent advisory committee and like an LCAP task force that was open to all, but would often be, attended more by like our community-based organization partners than parents. And like, where do parents interact? You interact at the schools. The district, like, yes, we run the whole school district, but I mean, my kids are out of school now, or at least out of K-12 schools. But, but like as a parent, like, I was on my kids' SSC because that's where you really understand what's happening. So for the LCAP, we wanted to be informed by what's happening, by people who are connected to their schools. So rather than have a parent advisory committee where it was centrally appointed, we are having this LCAP advisory committee where we asked SSCs from each of our cohorts to nominate members. So you had to be on an SSC to be a part of the LCAP, because then you also already have some familiarity with like how school budget works. And when we talk about Title I, what that means and this and that. And then, but we did want to make sure that our underserved students and population have representation. So some of our existing advisory committees like APAC I mentioned, our District English Learner Advisory Committee, our MATUA for our Pacific Islanders, like they get to also appoint a representative. But what's really different this year, and that's key, that's important to me, is parents are deciding which parents will represent them, rather than bringing names to the Board of Education, and they ultimately decide. Really should be parents who are saying, who do we want to represent us? Because every school site council member gets elected by their school community. So we already know we're getting that voice in.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. That is a change. So I wanted to make sure that that it connects to everything we're talking about, right? As we connect that big plan and how we spend our resources, it all connects together. So coming back to a question that came up in the chat was a couple people are looking for clarification when you started talking about restricted funding versus general, and wondering about this. The question is PEEF money going, PEEF is the Public Education Enrichment Fund. That is a voter approved fund that I don't want to try to explain every detail of it for our attendees, but it is public voter approved funds that go and support SFUSD. So is that going to be used for the general budget? And then the other question related to that is why some PEEF funds have not been spent on their intended use. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so PEEF funds, there are some requirements for the PEEF funds. So PEEF funds, at least a third of them need to be used for, we call it SLAM, sports or PE, library, athletics, and music. sorry, library, arts, and music. And so those funds are being used for that. What I feel like the question might be asking is where I feel like where we haven't been clear is the transparency of how those funds have been used. I mean, there's reports, but what I mean by that is like understanding how schools get the allocation they get around library, arts, music, and PE. And so Dr. Aguilera Fort is actually working, one of his jobs is, I've said, we need to have a clear, like that everybody knows, okay, if I'm a school of 300 kids and 15 classrooms, every classroom is going to get 1 hour of PE, let's say, per week through PEEF. And then I think a parent even mentioned, like, if the parents are going to, want to use some of the site funds to augment that, that might be a parent decision, but it's clear from the baseline what we've used. What we found is so we're compliant in that way, but we haven't really been leveraging the funds. And then there are other funds that could help with just more general expenses. And that's what we want to use to think about, supporting our ongoing expenses. But I would say, like, and if the parent who said or someone else wants to speak up, but it's more like, how are we being clear on, like, those funds are being used, but how do you know that they are being allocated in the way that they're supposed to be?
Okay, and then as you said, these P funds are explicitly required by law to be spent in certain ways, right? And so, in fact, well, maybe we should just explain very high level for people that those P funds are divided in that SLAM category, and then there's sort of a student support category, right, of P funds. And so are those, because there's follow-up questions here. So wondering if you want to move PEEF money into other expenses covering other things. There are stipulations with those funds. So is there, I don't know if there's any more.
I think we're talking about here, I'll share my screen. So for the half that is the sports libraries and this and then see, it really is like a third, and the student supports. Like, what we're saying for that piece, we just want to be clear and leverage those. So it's understandable that across the system, people are, students are getting support from these funds. Then there is the other, about half that can be used for other general uses. And we also just want to be clear on, like, where those, where those are going.
Okay.
Carlene, did you want to add any more on this one?
Well, I think the question is if we are going to use those funds for other things other than what those have been designed and approved for. And the answer is no. So we are, even though the superintendent had mentioned we are making adjustments and making sure that we are clear about who is getting what, it's still those adjustments are connected to the letter of the law.
And let me say this.
What the voters approve is exactly what we are going to do, but following exactly those key components, whatever is for student support services and SLAM, and then the general purposes that it still will support students in schools. So
I really appreciate, this question in the chat makes it clear. The funds are supposed to supplement, not supplant. So what supplement means is saying, in addition to what you're already doing. But what I'm saying is what's unclear in our system is, what are we already doing? What is the base? And then what are we supplementing, right? So is the base that every school gets, art once a month? And then we're supplementing that? Is it they get art once a week? And that's what we're trying to define. That's the part that I'm saying that hasn't been defined. Yes, you can look and see, our expenses go to pay art teachers, music teachers, librarians, and everything. But what we haven't defined well, what's our core and what's our baseline, and then what are we supplementing and not supplanting. That's the process we want to go through. And as Carlene said, want to make sure we're using the funds as intended, but also being clear, what we're supplementing and what the base, what's our base.
I think that helps clear things up a little bit. People may have other more detailed questions, but I'll move on to another question because we're coming towards the end of our time together. And this one gets a little bit in the weeds. It's about school start times, which has also been a regularly hot topic in the district the last couple of years. So there's two. I'll ask two questions that came up from the chat. One, is there any move to change middle school to start earlier and high school later? Middle school at 9:30 is too late, especially for kids who need rides or want after school activities, and 8:40 is too early for high school, especially if they're taking congested city buses. And related, there was another timing question. It says it would be helpful to move the 7:50 start time for elementary schools. We were at a school that originally started at 8:40 and it was rough and our community felt unheard when the decision was already made. So I wonder if you can just generally talk about school start times, maybe some of the thinking that went into that, and if there are any plans for any adjustments in the near future.
Yeah, this decision was made a couple of years ago. And I mean, the thinking was we're spending a lot on transportation, as well as had inconsistencies with all the different start times, and being clear on like what we were able to offer and how things would work. So we wanted to have some clearly delineated start times have clear like the number of instructional minutes students would get at all of our schools. But I have heard the feedback that the shift to the 7:50 in particular is the one that has been challenging for school communities. And I think, being frank, like we've gotten the feedback. We've even have had some of our staff have talked with some parent leaders who've been really concerned about this. We don't have yet a concrete next step of like when this might be revisited. Just know have heard that feedback and know that's an issue that at some point, parents are going to want us to revisit and address.
Okay, thank you. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I don't have, necessarily any outstanding questions that have come up in the chat. So I want to just give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you haven't covered or you have been hearing families talk about that you'd like to bring up? And the same thing, if your colleagues here from SFUSD have something they want to add, they think might be useful, based on the kinds of questions and comments people have had so far tonight. Just a couple minutes left.
Yeah, good question. Demetrius, anything you want to share? So I'll put you on the spot first.
I think I'm just really appreciative of this space and that we're here with you all. And I think one of the biggest things that we're really trying to do, and this is one of my goals as the Associate Soup of Schools too, is the alignment and coherence. And so that families, many of the things that we talked about this evening, is that families can go from this school to this school and have a general idea, this is what SFUSD is about. And not that families, I'm going to choose this school because I think something different is going to happen here opposed to this school. And then even across division. Families shouldn't be afraid. If I've had this experience in elementary, is it going to be drastically different when I get to middle school? And then there's little Billy Bob and all the children are Billy Bob and Sally Sue to me. Billy Bob or Sally Sue is going to have a very different experience when they get to high school. We really want to, as you come in, we're looking at from our client perspective, and our clients are our children and their families from pre-K to high school. Schools have different identities, but you still know that you've had an SFUSD experience. And so it's going to take some time, but that is really our goal. And so all the things that we talked about, align PD, asking for certain structures that you don't have to go from school to school. And as a parent, I went to this school and they said this. I went to this other school and the answer was that. Like, what's the consistent message that children and families can expect as they enter SFUSD? And want to make sure that all families have a voice as well, and that they feel that they're a part of. We hear a lot from different family groups not feeling a part of. And so as we're trying to be coherent, we want to make sure that every family feels that same when they enter into our system.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing that. Carling, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close?
Well, aligned to that, in the area of curriculum and instruction, we also are working very, very hard to make sure that across the schools, students and staff receive the same kind of content, professional development that will equip the teachers across the system. And something that we haven't had for quite a bit is this idea of instructional materials that will support teaching and learning with the foundational elements in literacy and in math. And that has been evident by the results. And that's something that from the educational services side of the house, including special education, we are working to address as a system. And that's why the collaboration with the school side of the house and Ms. Rice Mitchell and her team. So we are committed to doing that. And the superintendent has given us clear direction that this is where we are heading.
Okay, thank you. And just a kind of a follow-up to that, and then I'll let Dr. Wayne have a final word before we close it out. When will teachers get the kind of training that you're talking about for these different kinds of, consistent instructional models throughout our district?
So in literacy, it's already happening. Once a month, teachers are receiving that almost the same week, that exact same professional learning opportunity is organized, designed, planned with our central team. Then from that, as I explained before, the same week goes to the principals. And from the principal, the following week goes to the teachers. And is every single piece of that professional development is already prepared so that people at the site level can implement and interact with those professional learning opportunities. So in literacy is taking place, and now we are designing for math as well.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Wayne, any final words from you before we close out?
Yes. Wait, yes. Give me 1 second for my final words.
Sure.
No, I can't help myself. So what I was going to say is, I do really want to thank you for this space, and thank you for trusting your kids with us. And just also, remember, we talk about a lot of challenges and we face a lot of issues, but also just on a daily basis, like I see so much joy and excitement in our schools. I gave some examples from in the classroom, but I also want to share, just love the school communities that we have. So like this Friday, we have an Access special education program. We're going to go participate in the holiday sing-along. And I couldn't find it. Well, maybe it's here. But like, want to appreciate, I got an invite to Francis Scott Keys, where I think Tina was at for Halloween. And and seeing the queen bees of the school. I was the SFUSD superintendent, and the kids going to the haunted house and through the maze, where I got jump scared, maybe more than the kids did. It's great. There is so much fun, engaging activities happening in our schools, that as much as we talk about the challenge, and I want to be real about the challenges, like this district is not where it needs to be. There's also really many special activities happening throughout the year for your students. So I just want to end on that note, that thank you for trusting them with us, and know that there are a lot of great things happening at our school that we should celebrate.
Thank you. Appreciate the high note. It's true. There are challenges and there are bright spots. Both things can be true at once. Want to thank you again, Dr. Wayne, Carling, Demetris. Thank you so much for making time to be in conversation with us tonight. Thank you for and everybody who is here, thank you for taking time out of your day and away from your family to learn and be in this conversation with us. We will post a link to this recording on our YouTube channel. We'll post it in all the usual places within the next couple of days. And with that, we will close it out and say good night to all of you.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. And our